All right, we're taking a look at Star Trek Adventures Captain's Log solo role-playing game. This is published by Modiphius, and it is a complete standalone rule system that is adapted from the award-winning Star Trek Adventures role-playing game, also published by Modiphius. And you can use it to create original Star Trek stories with a dynamic character formed from your own imagination. Whether you are venturing into the cosmos alone, conducting galaxy-spanning missions cooperatively with friends, or exploring the unknown with a game master facilitating your adventures, use the contents of this book to generate countless hours of memorable adventures. Create a character, use the tools combined with your fertile imagination, key here, to fashion your own fascinating Star Trek-style stories. Play in any era of Star Trek and explore strange new worlds, new civilizations, and all the wonders of the universe. It's a standalone product. A couple of points before I get into it. First of all, Modiphius did send me this copy of the book, and Modiphius is also the publisher of my own book, The Solo Game Master's Guide. So just transparency there. I have a relationship with the publishing company of this game book. The second thing I want to say is I feel the need to explain my own relationship to Star Trek, I guess to put all of this in context, which is that I watched the original series in reruns. I watched a bunch of the movies, I'm not sure which ones, and I have this Star Trek Next Generation Deanna Troi bookmark that was a gift to me from somebody years ago. That's kind of my relationship to Star Trek. I certainly know what it is. I know what probably most of the characters on Next Generation and the original. I'm not a Trekkie by any means. I'm not opposed to Trekkies. I'm just not a Trekkie. So that seems to be needed for context here, because there's a way in which this book, a large part of which is essentially source material or review of source material, is a gesture toward, I think, maybe people not familiar with Star Trek, but familiar enough that they would want to read or interested enough that they would want to read pages and pages of the history. I'm not really sure. But there's definitely a very big effort here, big to the point of these many pages of the book, to provide a detailed history, well, detailed for some, not detailed enough for others, no doubt, about what Star Trek actually is, and down to suggesting styles of sort of solo play that would make sense in the Star Trek universe. And on the one hand, I appreciate the concept of that. On the other hand, I think it's almost setting yourself up for failure. It's like I think real Trekkies are going to feel like this isn't enough information, and I'm not sure, if you didn't know anything about Star Trek, whether this could really convey what Star Trek is. That said, we're really here to talk about what this book is, this Captain's Log is. It is a self-contained solo RPG that falls somewhere between to me, it's mostly a journaling role-playing game. There are some die rolling mechanics that we will discuss. There are stats on your character and your ship sheet that come into play when you are rolling. So there are mechanics for using. It is a 2d20 roll every time you roll. That it does have those types of mechanics, yet bottom line, to me, this is more a journaling game than anything else. So we start out here by explaining what this game book is, and it does start right away on focusing on rules that support every era, meaning the source material. So right from the outset, you are related back to the source material, and you can then understand that the story-driven gameplay is in relation to that source material. So unlike a Starforged, in the Ironsworn system that is its own creation here, though this is self-contained, there is a way in which I think it gestures back explicitly and implicitly to source material that is outside of this book. And indeed, somewhere in here are suggestions of various TV shows, TV episodes, as well as movies that you can watch that will familiarize you with the various iterations of Star Trek. There is a guide to the Star Trek world and the discussion that it is a kind of hopeful science fiction world. There is diversity present from the outset of the original series throughout, what the culture is. I'm not going to go page by page here, but the point is that they're setting you up with the larger context of what the world is and the approach to living in a future world is. And then you get a whole section on the technology of the world and what these terminologies refer to, and down to kind of era-specific terminology translators. And again, to me, this is of relevance, I guess, to somebody who is very steeped in Star Trek mythology, but they might already know that, and I'm not actually sure how it relates to gameplay, except if you're attempting to really set your own story in an existing mythology of Star Trek that would make sense. So you're using the right word to refer to away team as opposed to boarding party or the landing party or something like that. In any case, there are pages and pages of this kind of information. And then it moves into the errors of play, how to select an error of play, and moving through all the years of what the Star Trek world was or will be or was in the past media and will be in the future. And again, to situate myself in this, like, I actually had no idea of what the years were that the Star Trek Enterprise was meant to be in and any of this. So my relationship to the material is that light in that way. There's then a chapter on the style of play and how you can relate this to, I guess, the concept of being on screen and off screen, and the story arcs that would relate to something that would be very formally constructed as a movie or a scene, and different types of exploration games that you could play, far from home games. Again, there's a way in which this is so linked to media that is outside of solo RPG that it's a little curious to me to, it's not something I would think of, let's put it that way, in terms of sitting down to do a solo RPG to try to relate the structure of my story back in this way. But that is here. And of course, anything in this is optional to use or not. The character creation, there are two different ways to do it. There's the life path option, which is giving you a sort of backstory, development, and stats based on narrative things that happen. I think it owes a lot to the original Traveler character creation, which I've been meaning to do a video on forever and just haven't, but perhaps this will prompt me to do that, which really does walk you through the history of a person, and then you end up with stats based on their history. Or in this other option here, you can use creation in play to just start telling the story with a basic character concept in mind. And I think this is a great place to show how, to me, this is more of a journaling game than not, even though there's characters with stats. You get the attributes here. You have an explanation of what they are: control, daring, fitness, insight are some of them, and it will explain to you what that comes into play. So using the control attribute, when you're faced with violence, you could shoot at enemies or focus on a different problem. You could use daring. So when faced with violence with daring, maybe you would do hand-to-hand combat. Or fitness, when faced with violence, you would be perhaps trying to restrain a foe. So it's showing you how you have the choice to use different attributes, and the attributes will relate to modifications on your or coming up with a target number that you're attempting to roll under with your D20. You have the narrative choice to approach a similar situation of violence, say with control, daring, or fitness, and it gives you those examples here. And then it also gives you a helpful table that will relate the value that you end up with on your attribute to what it means narratively. And I think this is useful as a direction for interpreting your character's actions, actually using the meaning that is intended by the game mechanics here. In addition to the 6 attributes, you have 6 disciplines, and it says, whereas attributes show a character's natural proclivities and preferred approaches, disciplines show the areas of expertise. And the disciplines are command, con, engineering, security, and science and medicine. And again, explanations of what this means and how you can combine what a character, for example, with a high science and a high reason value would be like. And it's giving you like, that's the archetypical character. And then there are focuses. So the 6 discipline characters are trained in a broad areas. Specific focuses allow them to demonstrate talent for a narrower set of activities. So you have, you could roll on these focus areas, or you could choose one. So say you wanted to do engineering and make an engineering character, you could roll or choose a specific area of focus for your character. And then there's the concept of values. And values here are interpretations that you make for your character based on a combination of the attributes and the focus and the disciplines that was like a statement about your character. There's not a chart or a table to roll on. You come up with this narratively to flesh out what your character is. So, for example, just a simple thing like, I want to be the best captain possible, or when things get stressful, I get calm. And the values will evolve and change during the course of the play. And there are, I said play, the story. There is a value matrix here that you can roll on to give some suggestions, but it's a D20 table, and really the concept of the values are much broader than that. So I think you need to sort of create your own story about your character as you develop them. If you take the life path creation mode, you could do it randomly, or you could make an option. And again, it starts out by era. So this is an important construct to the presentation of the material. You could just ignore this, I suppose, if you wanted to, but you are picking a species and you're given a map here of what the species are, and then how the attributes are adjusted based on the species. So the species does have a mechanical impact on the stats that you get. And then you will begin moving through the setting that your character is, the world that your character comes from, and they're based on that. For example, if you come from a frontier colony, you will be instructed to create a value which reflects the environment of this frontier colony. You will adjust either the control or fitness attribute by 1, and then you will increase one of these 3 disciplines by 1, meaning that somebody who came from a frontier colony would develop in those particular areas. This would be opposed to if you came from what's determined to be a busy colony, for example. This is one of the oldest or most prosperous colonies, so you would be developing different things here. the concept that you are a product of the environment in which you are raised. Then you move on to the type of upbringing you have, and it follows a similar pattern where you have a big category that you are choosing or rolling on to say, well, I came out of a business or trade upbringing, or I came out of an artistic and creative upbringing. And then a similar situation where if you are from a particular upbringing, you then go through and adjust attributes related to that upbringing to your character sheet to build your character and show how your character has developed statistically in line with the upbringing. You determine an aspiration for your character, like what they want to do in life. And it says each aspiration you choose gives your character a single point to add to one of their disciplines. So again, following this theme of if you're somebody who wants to explore, certain things would be developed. If you want to fly, if you want to protect, various different attributes would be developed. So this is a nice way to understand your character, and it does form a significant part, I think, of the game itself. It's the character creation is part of the play of the game, especially if you do it this sort of slow evolution way, which causes you to think about the character and, again, creating these values that add a value reflecting the beliefs that you are developing along the way during the course of your training, for example. And those values are the beginning of a story about your character. And then you get all the way to how long your career is, career events that happen. And again, the events are going to give you prompts to write down in your captain's log something about your character that happened in the past, as well as adjusting an attribute, a value, and a discipline value. And then at the end, the finishing touches, just to make sure you haven't over or undervalued your character, you will be able to know that the total attributes should be 56, and the total discipline added together should be 16. You should have 4 values and 6 focuses. So it is, at the end, you have like a check on it to get your whole character together. And that is the character creation, the slower version of it. And then you're provided also with a way to create the character as you play through a game or through a session that you're developing. There's a chapter on creating starships and creating your home world with a flowchart here about, again, roll on or select an era for it. You select a ship, a class. There are some stats for classes or some stats for the ships here, and you can see them all laid out here, and it explains to you what the design of the ship is. And sometimes in play, these stats would come into play, again, depending on how you run your story, whether that's significant to you or not. There's quite a few pages here of this. When I was starting my story, I didn't really do too much. I rolled on this ship idiosyncrasies table here, again, just to kind of make it be narrative. I wasn't really imagining my character roaming around a whole ship per se, because then I felt like I was just this one character in this big empty ship. It was hard for me to kind of imagine a whole crew in the background, but you are instructed here, given prompts here to develop this, like, are you the first captain of this vessel? Who was it before you? What key battles has your vessel been involved in? So again, all of this could be added to the backstory, could be part of the log that you're keeping, the journaling solo RPG that you're creating as the response to the prompts in this book. And the ships have some stats here for talents that they may have and what they can do. and you can roll on, let's see if there's a table here. Yes, you can roll on this table, a 3d20 table, to choose those, and you can give your ship a name and create a space station for it. It's only on page 179 of this book that is about 300 plus pages that you get to the rules of play themselves. Everything that came before it was the character development and the source material. There's a note here. I have not played Star Trek Adventures itself. There's a note here for those who have about how this is different. And it will walk you through how to start playing the game. And it tells you to create your character and ship, which you've really already done if you've been following the rules. This might have been something better earlier on in the book. Select your mission type, and we're going to get to the tables in the back, really starting on page in the 200s here. There are the random tables that you will be using that we'll take a look at in a moment, and create an incident theme, advantages and complications, and begin by rolling for an encounter, generating NPCs, etc. A lot to do, really, to fill in the blanks of the story, and what you are doing is the result of responding to the random tables and the prompts. In terms of the actual die rolling, what you are doing is you are deciding how to approach a task, and then you are going to be rolling 2d20. And to get the value, your target number, you will be adding up the value of your attribute and your discipline that you choose to approach the task. So if you're approaching a task, in this case with, say, daring, a combination of daring and engineering, we have 8 plus 2, that's 10. That's going to be pretty tough. That is your target number. You roll your 2d20, and you're looking to get underneath the target number. That is a success. And if you get a equal to or under, that is a success. If you get 2 successes, you will gain momentum, which is a positive attribute that you have that you can use in the future to re-roll, for example. Or if you fail, if you're rolling over that target number, you will fail, and then you will gain a threat. And we'll see later on there are charts that you then can roll on to determine what the threat might be. And it gives you the instructions on how to use it's called probability matrices. Here, there's basically an oracle table that is going to help you determine whether something succeeds or fails, and the advantages and complications tables that we talked about based on whether you're successful or not in the task that you are trying to do. And then we have tables for encounters, characters and creatures, places, and just other random tables that we will take a look at. Further discussion here of the concept of momentum and threat. So if you have momentum, you can use it to re-roll. You can add an advantage to the story. There's a table you can roll on to use up your momentum to roll on the advantage table. And you can also use it to eliminate threat. And threat is something that you get when it is a failure. And if you are going to get rid of the threat, you roll on the complication table or increase the difficulty of something. And this is a system that probably owes something to Ironsworn with the concept of momentum, and definitely serves to give a direction, a narrative direction to help you decide whether something is going your way or is not going your way based on the die rolling that you are doing. So there's a little example here of the gameplay that Captain Singh is on the ship trying to navigate through a nebula. Her target number is 9. Due to a particularly bad roll she experienced earlier, she has some threat. She chose to use the threat to increase the difficulty on her next roll, which is one of the options. So now she needs to roll 2 successes instead of 1. She rolls and got to 5 and a 14. The 14 is a failure, and she needed both dice to roll successes. However, she had momentum stored from earlier in the act. She spends it, which allows her to re-roll the 14, and then she gets a 7 this time. So now both dice are under the target number, so she will succeed in navigating the field. Normally, she would have gotten momentum because of those 2 successes, but because she needed 2 successes for the increased difficulty, she doesn't get any, but she did succeed in the task. So that is one way of using the successes and failures to manipulate the needs of the die rolling. There's a description here of how to use the ship in the concept of your play by using the ship essentially as a character, and to get the target number, focusing on the ship's combination of system and department, which kind of correlates to attributes and disciplines, and using that as the a target number. And then you see the combat flow chart here, and here, as in elsewhere, the entire description of the game that you're playing, of the story that you're writing, is based on what would be like in a TV show or a movie, where it's decided, where it's called like it's a scene. So things are very much divided up into scenes, and there is a flowchart here on how to go through the scene and an example of gameplay. I'm not going to get into the specifics here, because it's pretty well mapped out, and the video's getting long-ish enough. I want to make sure I have time to spend on the random tables that are at the end of the book, and further discussion of what the ship's actions can be and how you use the ship's attributes to do those actions. There is way here at the end of the book, on page 217, there is this question of different modes of play. Why would you play solo, and what collaborative storytelling is. Again, this to me is a little oddly placed, because, and then is this a game just for captains? Can you play other types of characters? This sort of seems to me, I would think this would be placed earlier in the book, but nevertheless is a larger scale explanation of solo co-op and even guided play that can be used. This could be used with somebody essentially being like a GM, but still working from here. And then it gives you the section on how you're getting ready to play, what the 3-act structure is that they are recommending for your gameplay. And again, this kind of comes after they're already referring to that structure and what makes a scene. And then there is a discussion of giving you lots of examples of how you actually write your captain's log and create the narrative record of what you're doing, and giving a lot of prompts here. For example, people. Are you alone? How are you feeling? Are there neutral parties? Is this a formal or informal setting? Do you have a backstory with any of the characters? None of this is going to be possible to generate from prompts necessarily here in this book. A lot of it is going to just be imaginative, suggestive writing based on what you have come before. It says using your imagination to set the scene, and giving you, again, another example of the process here for the core game loop, which begins with telling a story, narrating a task, rolling your dice, determining the impact, narrating the outcome, and continuing along. So, what are actually the prompts and tables here? The probability matrices, they are given as appendices in the book, beginning on page 254 with a basic yes-no table and an explanation of how to use it. And then you're given some ways to generate missions using these tables. And this is pretty useful material. Probably could have also been duplicated up front. It comes in a different form earlier on in the book. And you can see here, there's a general mission type here. So there's a D20 table of diplomacy, political, patrol, and then each of the entries here have a further explanation. So if you rolled aid and relief, you then roll and find yourself having to protect a merchant convoy. Well, you might ask yourself, what merchant convoy? Where does it come from? Where is it going? This is going to be something you would have to generate on your own. So everything here is just a spark for you to create your own story and narrate it through the journaling that you're doing in your captain's log. Perhaps it's a defensive mission. You're going to join a fleet for defensive maneuvers. That is very, very vague, and you would need to fill in those details yourself. Perhaps you're doing near space exploration and you need to dedicate a new ship, or you're patrolling and you have to repair a collapsed defensive grid. Again, whose defense is it? What world or society does it come from? What does it even mean to do that? This is all up to you to determine. And I think that if you are somebody who is well steeped in the tropes of this imaginative world and universe, it might be easier to do than if you are not. The effort at the beginning, I think, to give a lot of the backstory and the terminology and the history, I think, is meant to help you create these kinds of stories. I'm just not sure how possible that would be if you're not already pretty fluent, as it were, in Star Trek. There are a theme and incident table here. Again, prompts that you can roll on to create a general mission like destroy a nest, or save an energy being, or transform a living ship. So these are kind of like spark tables. And then we have the advantages and complications tables that are rolled on after you have an incident, an inciting incident, or if you are getting an advantage or a complication in the course of the mechanics of the gameplay. So, for example, a mechanical advantage could be that you come across a helpful species, or that there is a beneficial environmental element, something like a rare element or a sympathetic political group come to your assistance. So these are broad-ranging, wide-ranging prompts that you can use to impact your story. Or a complication, there's a shattered chain of command or some type of diplomatic incident. Due to the technicalities of galactic law or a tense political situation, the crew must proceed carefully or the situation will get worse. So again, general prompts here. There are 4 encounters. You can roll on this table here, which will give you different types of encounters, like an abandoned place or an inhabited planet or subspace or an uninhabited planet. And then you can go to the D20 table for each of those entries to see if you rolled on an abandoned place, for example, it's a failed colony, or it is an orphanage with a dark past. Again, it would be up to you to take that prompt and kind of run with it to create the details of the story. So it does rely pretty heavily on you to respond to prompts in a way that can move a story forward. An uninhabited planet was perhaps used as a testing ground for illegal black market weaponry. There are tables here for what you could spend your momentum on. For example, an advantage of a danger revealed, and then you could roll on the table and say, oh, an ally's betrayal is uncovered. Or a friendly alien encounter is an advantage. They offer helpful technology. Same thing for random threats. So if you need to give a threat and you're not sure what to do, you can roll on the table, oh, it's systems failure. Well, what happens with my system failure? The sensors are out. And then narrate what that means in the context of your story. And then you get some random tables to create NPCs. There's NPC archetypes, pilots, explorers, soldiers. They even have NPC upbringings that you can roll up, their cultural traits and their own goals, their tactics that they might use. And then there is a page of tables to create beasts in the galaxy, what their origins are, what they might look like, the size, their preferred environment, adaptations that they may have had. And then there are tables for how sentient they are, basically, and what type of energy they may use. You get tables for creating large-scale new worlds, so like what the stars are, and like it's a class A star, and then you get the table, well, what does that actually mean? How many planets it is. If you really want to build out the detail here, you have some charts to do that, as well as to design entire civilizations and give the broad brush strokes of what their technological development is, what the population of the planet is, the governance, and you could decide their religion and what that meant, what they have to offer you. And then finally, we have a location generator here. So there's themes for the locations, like it's an alien site. This is the pulse and hum of insect masses fills your ears here. The walls are lined with innumerable hives. Or it's a cataclysmic site that life support failure happened here for unknown reasons, that those without proper equipment will die quickly without any assistance. Or it is perhaps contaminated or dimensional. Everyone in this location sees random images and people from their past. There's tables to determine if there's space combat and your ship is hit, what system was hit, and then what the damage to that system would be. It could be minor, moderate, or critical, and some random tables for how long it's even going to take you to fix it. And then finally, a kind of hodgepodge of additional matrices, downtime on a ship. There's a gym. There's some family events that could happen, some plot components, and you could go mining, and there's resources that are needed, just things that you could choose if you wanted to add in these details, down to an alien name and world generator that you roll on to come up with some random alien names, a planet name generator, and then the sheets, the character sheet for your captain, as well as the sheet for the ship, and places to suggested way of filling out your log, although I think that anyone actually playing this game would probably just be writing this all down in a notebook and not necessarily following along with this form per se. And then there's a mission tracker. So this is, to me, it's very ambitious, and it is a curious mixture of like a source book material, suggestion of ways to write a story that's in the Star Trek universes, that is adjacent to the Star Trek universes, but also to have agency by taking some die rolls and playing out a character that you create within the story that you write. It doesn't fall squarely, in my mind, as a strict journaling game, because there are a lot of directives about how to create the scenes and the arcs, and the fact that it is and is meant to be played within the Star Trek universe is significant. And it's not an open-ended journaling game in that regard, because you are, I think, meant to be linked with the existing source material in a way to make it come to life. So in that respect, it's for people who want very much to be within that world. I think there are a lot of questions. Could you use these random tables here in the back with something else, like Starforged, for example, or maybe even D100 Space? And I think the answer is yes, you can, that they are open-ended enough prompts that you could absolutely use them as random tables for just a generic kind of sci-fi game that you were going to play. I think to have the full effect of Star Trek coming through, a lot of it is going to depend on what you bring to the game before you start to play it. So the extent to which this will feel like Star Trek, to me, seems equivalent to the extent to which you are familiar with and steeped in Star Trek before you come to this rule set. I don't think this rule set can create a Star Trek feeling for somebody who already doesn't have a Star Trek feeling of some sort. And I think the extent to which it would be successful in creating a Star Trek feeling is directly related to the extent to which you already had that feeling. So, for example, when I was creating a character, I found myself in the end, I was creating Deanna Troi, I realized, even though I didn't intentionally set out to do that. I think you bring to it what you already have with your relationship to Star Trek. And if that is something that you that you would enjoy, then I think this is for you. And if you like journaling games or want to experiment with journaling games that have a fair amount of built-in structure, I think this is a game for you. If you're looking for something that is heavier on die rolling and mechanics and is going to provide you with a lot of different mechanical choices to make, you might find this lacking a little bit, because the mechanics of the die rolling are really very strongly coming out of the narrative and the story that you're creating, as opposed to different mechanical options that are given already to you by the rule set. So that's a look inside Star Trek Adventures. It is an ambitious solo role-playing game that is taking a hugely beloved franchise and having an effort to give you a way into it, even though the franchise itself has so many different aspects to it, and it's attempting to be a home for all Star Trek lovers who want to play solo role-playing